Hey book lovers, want to hear a story? Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a mini episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing my book feelers, a chapter or two sometimes a week. This week, it's chapter 28. Enjoy. I woke to bright sunlight streaming in through the hut's only window and the sound of voices outside. Gwen and Kaya entered the hut, and Gwen handed me a wooden cup containing a bright pink liquid that smelled and tasted overwhelmingly sweet. "Drink it all," Gwen said with a kind smile. "It will give you energy." "You're going to need it," Kaya said. Her tone was sharp and her words were clipped and direct. She smiled, but underneath she was barely containing her anger. I emptied the cup, choking a little on the sweetness. It slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the table. A warmth blossomed in my belly and spread through my body in a pleasant wave. I was suddenly wide awake and ready for anything. "Ready?" Kaya was halfway out the doorway when she asked. The word was tossed over her shoulder. Gwen met my look with a small smile. She shrugged and followed Kaya. She was placid and kind, but otherwise impossible to read. Most people could barely keep their emotions under wraps, but Gwen was a blank wall, emotionless. "Hurry up, dear," Mills called from outside. I joined them and watched the other auroras, swarming from their homes and down the trees. As the platform lowered us to the ground, we watched the snaking lines of people moving into the caves. The auroras were taking shelter until it was over, until I did what needed to be done. Elena stood beside me on the platform, but she wouldn't look at me. The girl in her tattered black cloak grinned at me from the other side. She stood a little behind Elena and smiled in a way that made me incredibly uneasy. We stepped off the platform to solid ground, and a sense of relief flooded through me. Mills pulled the young girl aside, and they spoke quietly for a moment. The girl sprinted away, and Mills returned to us with a smile. "So it begins," she said, and my stomach flip-flopped. We walked in silence for hours, through the mountains and forests to the edge of the city, the place of sacrifice, where starborn babies were left to their fates. The city was humming with life. Even on the outskirts we could hear the noises and bustle. The sound was soothing and familiar. I felt a pang of longing for my old room in our familiar apartment, walking in a line and following the rules. The longing was for something that had never truly existed. What I truly longed for was ignorance. "Ready?" Mills held my hands and looked into my eyes. I nodded and tried to smile, though I did not feel anywhere close to ready. She kissed my cheeks and squeezed my shoulders. "Let's go, then." We moved into the city. My heart began racing the moment I stepped onto the pavement. I felt someone take my hand, and Elena was at my side. She still didn't look at me, but she gripped my hand tightly. We moved into the bustle together, and held on for as long as we could, before the city swept us apart. We parted at the corner where two streets merged and the lines split. Elena got caught up in a line moving east toward the work buildings. I was moved west toward the health buildings, and in the distance I could see the dingy gray building of the Silent Trees Wellness Center. Kaya had given me a pale pink uniform and told me where to report to the housekeeping manager. The others had dispersed throughout the city, each with their own job. I couldn't worry about them. I was about to step back into my original prison. I felt ill and my hands trembled. There was a dark green metal door on the side of the building. I knocked 3 times and waited. The woman that opened the door wore the same pink uniform and a placid, heavily medicated expression. "New one?" she said without any inflection. "Yes," I stammered. My voice was trembling uncontrollably. I swallowed hard, but she wasn't looking at me. She had turned her back to me and was walking away at a fast clip. I hurried after her before the door slammed shut. At the end of the dimly lit hallway, the woman unlocked a steel door. I hesitated. She turned to me and smiled. It was a perfunctory action. There was no emotion. The room was a small cube of gray cement lit by a single bulb overhead. I tried to pull back, but the woman grabbed my arm in a painfully tight grip and wrenched me into the room. I heard a pop and my shoulder exploded with pain. I fell onto the floor with a scream as she slammed the door shut behind me. I heard the lock slide into place and her footsteps as she walked away. I tried to sit up while holding my shoulder in place. My left arm hung uselessly at my side, and every movement sent another sharp jolt of pain through me. I managed to get my back against the wall, and I used my feet to push myself upright. I had just managed to sit up when I heard heavy footsteps and the clang of the lock being slid open. The man who entered the room was tall and slim and dressed all in black. A fedora was perched atop his head at an odd angle, and one eye was covered with a shiny black eye patch. The visible eye was bloodshot and ringed with dark circles. He smiled when he saw me sitting on the floor. His teeth were black with rot and decay. "Hello, Jane," the man said in his low, gravelly voice. He leaned against the door with his arms crossed. His nightmarish smile grew even wider when I did not respond to his greeting. "You know," he said softly, "your friend Neil tried to save you. It would have worked had Misha not intervened. It's too bad, really. Had I been given access to the Golden Hills, I would have let him live. That was all I wanted. I honestly could not have cared less about either of you." He moved to me and nudged me with his foot. "Get up." When I didn't move fast enough, he grabbed my hair and pulled me to my feet. A cry escaped my lips that I immediately wished I could take back. The man smiled. He put his face close to mine. His foul breath was hot on my cheek. "But now you're here. Our most complicated patient has returned. The most stubborn and vindictive, psychopathic patient to ever walk the halls of Silent Trees. The instigator of the only escape in the history of our wellness center." His dark bloodshot eye narrowed, and he brought his face even closer. The stench was overwhelming. "I care about you very deeply now, and you're going to regret that." He slammed his palm against the wall beside my head, and a panel opened up. He punched a couple of buttons, and the floor began to shake. A section of it slid away, and a metal table rose up from underneath. "No!" I yelled into his face. Somehow the force of this word seemed to set him off balance. I pulled myself from his grip and slammed my arm into the wall. There was another loud pop and more pain, but then my arm was back. Not useful, but at least back where it was supposed to be. The man lunged for me, and I leaned against the wall and kicked behind me. My foot connected with his jaw, and he fell back against the table. His head connected with the corner. There was a sickening crack, and he slumped to the ground. Blood began to pool around him. I threw open the door and sprinted down the hallway, gripping my useless arm. The door at the far end led outside, but that wasn't where I needed to go. I scanned the blank walls and noticed one brick was dirtier than the others. Without hesitation, I slammed my palm down on the cement square, and a door panel slid open. I stepped through into another hallway. This one was carpeted, and the walls were adorned with light fixtures and artwork. 6 evenly spaced paintings of trees hung along the hall. Each one had its own pool of light. Each tree bore a different symbol. The one closest to me depicted a single raindrop. "Not that one," said a voice that sounded vaguely familiar. I spun around, but the hall appeared empty. A laugh erupted next to my ear, and I jumped and spun around a second time. A small silver figure the size of my hand fluttered before me. Even in miniature, I recognized Neil's face. "Neil?" He crossed his arms and rolled his eyes. Soft gray wings carried him up and away from me. He hovered near another painting. This tree bore the symbol of a horrific eyeball. What happened? It slipped out before I could stop it. Neil glared at me and flew at my face with surprising speed. He punched me in the nose. Ow, I said, though it didn't really hurt. It just surprised me. I waved my hand at him, and he flew angrily out of reach. This, he spit out the word while gesturing to his petite figure, is my third incarnation. He gritted his teeth, and his hands balled up into fists. After a moment, he sighed, and the tension went out of his body. I haven't quite adjusted, he said softly. I didn't think it would be like this. He drifted to the next painting. This tree bore vibrant orange and yellow leaves. The symbol on the trunk was the 3 circles I'd first seen when I met Mills. Not this one, but you know that already, he said, gesturing to the painting. Why did you help him? Neil laughed again. Who, Leopold? Nice job taking him out of the picture. You've bought yourself plenty of time to escape. Answer my question, Neil. I don't appreciate being lied to. I never lied to you. I got you out. I helped you along. I even kept Leopold from catching you. It's not my fault Misha caught you. He was right. He had not betrayed me. I had been used as a means to get into Misha's land, but I had no allegiance to her. How would you have ever escaped if I hadn't joined them? His eyes glowed with anger. Do you have any idea what I had to do to make all of this happen? Look at me. He screeched and flew at me. He pummeled me with his tiny fists, and his wings flapped in my face. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Slowly, he burned himself out. His fistfalls slowed. I opened my eyes and exhaled softly. My breath carried him away, and he drifted slowly to the ground. He laid on his back on the plush ruby carpet and struggled to catch his breath. I sank down to the soft flooring next to him. We sat in silence for a while. How is this even possible? He asked exasperatedly, holding his arms up in dismay. You girls turn into goddesses and I'm, what, one of the fae folk? You'd be lucky for that kind of magic. Maybe, he grumbled. Another long silence. There was one question rattling around in my head. I tried to banish it. I didn't want to ask. I really didn't want to know. Did it hurt? Neil knew what I was asking. His lower lip stuck out a little, and finally, he nodded. His eyes were wide and stared at something I could not see. A memory. Horribly, he said. And that is the end of Chapter 28, book lovers. I hope you're still enjoying Feelers. We're getting so close to the end, and I will be back next week with another chapter. Until then, keep reading.